Harm reduction is the radical notion that drug users are people. This is an adaptation of a quote by Marie Scheer. Feminism is the radical notion that women are people. Just in the same way that women are treated as second-class citizens for no reason, so are people who use drugs. When I was asked to give this presentation, at first I thought, no, it shouldn't be me. We should be elevating the voice of somebody who has experienced this kind of oppression in a more real way than I have. But then I realized that just as it's the responsibility of white people to educate each other about racism, rather than asking people of color to bear the mental and emotional burden of doing that education, it is our responsibility to educate each other. Just as the people who care for these populations are responsible for educating each other about the oppressions that they face. This topic is important because, particularly in the area of perinatal substance use, for a really long time, everyone has agreed that we need to respond with compassion and treat this as a public health problem, and that punishment is counter-effective. And yet, we respond with punishment and surveillance and judgment. We have all been taught to hate and mistrust people who use drugs. And therefore we build systems of oppression against people who use drugs. But the only way to dismantle the systems is to first begin to dismantle the implicit bias in ourselves.
The indigenous nations in this area. The Wichita, or as they call themselves, the Kirikiriish, traditionally were the caretakers of this land that we're standing on. And I like to highlight language today for both of the nations that I'm going to be talking about because it sort of demonstrates the completeness of the physical and cultural genocide that was inflicted upon these people. This is a photo of Doris Jean Lamar McLemore, who looks like a badass if I ever saw one. And she was the last native speaker of the Wichita language, and she's now passed away. So that's heartbreaking. The language is such a foundation of a culture for a people, and to have your last native speaker pass away, it's the end of an era. So I'm going to say it a few times. The Wichita, and I invite you to repeat it along with me if you would like. It is pronounced Kirikiriish, Kirikiriish, Kirikiriish. And then a little more difficult, I'm going to do my best to ask how are you all. It would be Eshi Rashi Sak. Eshi Rashi Sak. There you go. And you can go to the website on the slides, and they have a whole library of recorded language. And I think that's, as a person whose ancestors were the invading colonizers, I feel that this is literally the least I can do to try to repair some of that damage that was done by people that look like me. The other nation that was traditionally caretakers of this land are the Comanche, or as they call themselves, the Numunu. And they have an outreach office in Dallas. I would encourage anybody that's interested to go check that out. There's a language app you can download for your phone to help learn that language. And there's also a beginner's language packet with like flashcards and videos and stuff. I've ordered it. It has not arrived yet. I'm super excited. You may recognize the Comanche from the movie Code Talkers. This is a photo of the young men who served in World War II using their language, which nobody else knew, and was a very effective tool for the United States. So we want to honor both the past and present elders and honor them. So now we'll get going on the meat of the talk. talk. And I included that little bias, it's not just for other people, because it's really, really important for everybody to acknowledge our own imperfection. And that doesn't mean that you're a bad person or you're wrong. It's just, this is part of being human. We all have these. I had a conversation with a nurse one time that I worked with where she said, I can't be racist, I'm Mexican. And that being a member of an oppressed group is not any kinds of protection against having implicit bias. I have biases against women, and I am a woman. I find myself thinking things about, for example, somebody will be driving in a certain way and I'll look and I'm like, yep, it's a woman. And I'm a woman, and I think that, and then I have to refocus myself and recognize that, because that's the only way that you can root it out of your own self. You have to look at it in its ugly, ugly face, and it's embarrassing. But that's the way that we get rid of it. So implicit, these definitions I'm going to use for this talk, they're not technically exactly how Merriam-Webster would define them, but for us, implicit means unconscious. So that means that these are things that happen in the part of our brain that we don't really notice, we don't really control. It just happens, like breathing. When we talk about bias, it's not the same as prejudice. Prejudice is conscious. Bias is just kind of an inclination, a leaning that we all have. And let's see, and then privilege, for our purposes, privilege is an advantage that is not applied based on merit. So for example, I am more likely to get a job because I am white. And that doesn't mean I'm better for that job, that is a thing that happens, and it's not based on my merit or how good I am. And I want to talk to you about intersectionality a lot. That's going to be a theme in this talk, because people that use drugs that are women already have two intersecting forms of discrimination that they face. If they happen to be a woman of color, if they happen to be somebody who has different abilities, perhaps they drive a wheelchair, perhaps there is dyslexia, there's all kinds of different things that can intersect to inform the way that other people see us. One way that I really think is useful for explaining this is from the book So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijoma Oluo. And she talks about implicit bias as, so you've been brought up in this culture where people walk down the streets and as they talk, they're flailing their arms around like this. And everybody in your culture is aware of that and knows, and they walk far apart from each other. And then you go to somewhere else, and you're on a crowded sidewalk, and you're walking around, flailing your arms, and you're not trying to hit anybody, but you do hit people. And so the idea is that intention does not mitigate impact. If you break somebody's nose and you didn't mean to, their nose is still broken. And so that helps me understand a lot. And another thing that I want to point out is oftentimes these biases for other groups that we've all been talking about, especially in the last few years, are implicit, but for people that use drugs, many times they're not. I'm sure we've all heard people say things about people who use drugs that are explicit, that are directly acknowledging that the person who's speaking does not like people who use drugs, or thinks that they are bad parents, or that they shouldn't have control of their own health care. So we're talking about implicit bias, but it's not always implicit. Couple more definitions before we can really get going. Stigma, for our purposes, I've seen a few definitions and I like them all. The one that I usually use is it's shame that's imposed externally. So it's not an internal feeling like I am bad, I did something wrong. It's other people saying you should be ashamed of yourself. And it's all-encompassing. This is something that people encounter everywhere they go, every day, all the time, from their family, from employers, from people they walk by on the street. Everyone, all the messages that they hear are, you're bad, you should be ashamed. Pride and shame are opposites. Pride is the satisfaction with your own good bits, basically. So it's acknowledging and knowing that you are a good person, that you're deserving of respect. Shame is the opposite of that. It's disgrace, it's humiliation. So when you'll see, sometimes I wear a button or a t-shirt that says proud to be a drug user. Oh, and I didn't mention that. I've done all the drugs. Most of them are fun. I haven't really, I've never had a problem that I would define as a problem. According to DSM-5, I have a very serious problem with caffeine, but otherwise, I'm good. Proud to be a drug user. This isn't, I'm not talking about the kind of pride that's better than. It's the kind of pride where you can hold your head up high and stand tall and know that you are worth something. And so, pride is necessary for positive change. If you don't think you're worth something, then you're not worth the effort of trying to change your substance use or trying to improve your life. If you have shame, then you don't think you're worth it and you don't make that effort. So it's really important to think about those as opposites.